intro configuration.
Thanks very much for the intro, and thanks to the organizers this year for, again, another fabulous meeting. I'm going to build on some of the themes that Sunit talked about. So here's what we know. We know that the smartphone penetration in the US is 77%. That's not phone, that's smartphone, defined as a screen and network capability. What I didn't know until recently is what's happening in the smartwatch penetration in the US. It is 13%. It's mostly a younger population, but it's going up 20% year over year. The other interesting thing is that fitness bands are going down in sales for a greater consumer preference into watches which just do more things. The other interesting thing is smartwatch sales in countries like China for children are going way up, which may be a very interesting market for diagnostics. Wearables, as Sunit referred to, are hard to design. There's a lot of reasons why it's not going to be a continuous external loop recorder, and they're shown here. But this is the way I like to sort of think through where we are with wearables and phones in general. So you can use a camera or any image. You can use security cameras, which is being done, to look at perfusion on the finger, on the face, to look at active heart rate measurement. You can do the same to look at this within a regular rhythm, where this has to be user-triggered enabled. Again, the use cases are poor and these have had limited uptake. Then you get into fitness monitors and consumer-grade watches for passive heart rate sampling. Again, this is an unregulated area or does not require FDA clearance. It's really based on a consumer experience. And this is now when we start getting into AF-Mintu. Passive irregular rhythm notification, which we now see in watches. And this is, again, not yet a diagnostic. It's really in a new space called a pre-diagnostic, and this is also the way regulatory agencies are thinking about this. This is also not the same as traditional screening, which we can talk about. Everyone sort of thinks that this is screening, and it's not. We can get into that in the discussion. And then, of course, as Sunit talked about, the ad hoc ECG, whether they be on an accessory device, on a watch band, or directly on the watch itself. This has higher amounts of regulation with very tight guardrails, and because of that, the notification threshold and what the watch will tell you highly varies based on the device and approval. There's also blended models as well, where high activity may prompt an ECG. And it's the latter two that are sort of more relevant to disease management, and everything upstream of that, as Sunit said, is really in the consumer space. He just showed this study, as did Christine yesterday. This was one of the first early attempts to use heart rate irregularity on a watch. They basically tried to hack an Apple Watch into workout mode, and it looked very good pre and post cardio version. But when you looked at an ambulatory cohort, it wasn't quite promising at all. In fact, it was unacceptable. The positive predictive value was 8%. And so why was this so low? It's because they were anchoring themselves on measuring short episodes. 30 seconds is our traditional definition, which may be clinically meaningless. As we know, it really comes from the world of using that as an outcome by committee without really any clinical evidence behind the importance of it. So, can you do better than this? It really depends on how you think about irregularity and looking at it and increasing the specificity. And so we went on this exercise, and this is still ongoing, with Apple, who makes their own version of a watch, and took a different approach, where the idea wasn't to really look for short episodes, but was to look for periods of irregularity that were sustained, and then check and recheck and recheck, so that if 5 of 6 episodes met irregularity, you get a notification. And so remember, the use case here is people without AF-Mintu. You can't take this, at least yet, without data, and put it in a population where you want smaller burdens of AF-Mintu to guide management. So the idea here is let's look and look and look, and hopefully increase the specificity. The primary endpoints are shown here. And we did anchor this on 30 seconds because that was accepted, but we'll look at a number of time cut points as well, and this is going to be presented at ACC as a late breaker. We're also going to be looking at what happens with patients in terms of healthcare utilization. What did they do? Where did they end up? Did they go on anticoagulation? Did they have ablations, pacemakers, stress tests, etc.? And that's all going to be patient reported. But again, it's those questions that really help us understand where this is going to fit in our lives as clinicians. We wanted this to be very generalizable, and so we excluded patients without prior history of AF-Mintu or current anticoagulation use for any reason. But again, we were fortunate to enroll over 400,000 people, and that's sort of the power of doing virtual studies at scale. So again, results to be presented at ACC. There are many consumer-grade companies in this space who are looking at this, and they're kind of all shown here. They're all going after AF-Mintu. They're in various stages of approval. But we do know that this is likely to come now that the FDA actually has pretty strong predication around clearance, at least in some situations. But this is actually the first known ECG watch. This is from a patent from 1994. This was made by Instrumentics that made the old King of Hearts monitor. And on the port there, you can see that there's a phone jack. So you would fax this to your doctor to get an ECG. And so this didn't get any market traction for many reasons. And so what has really changed? How did we get from the left to where we are today with a watch or a band that can do the ECG? And it's really the technology, not so much the care delivery has changed. Manufacturing costs are less. We now have cloud. You don't need to connect a phone jack to a watch to send it to your doctor. We have AI to give you automated diagnosis or pre-diagnosis, and we have a completely revamped regulatory landscape that makes these technologies more consumer-facing versus the prescribed watch on the left. And I think I want to highlight the importance of AI for diagnosis. So many of these watches, in fact, do tell you that you have AFib or you don't have AFib, and there isn't a doctor in the loop making that determination. And there are many studies that have looked at ECGs and looking at this. This is one such study where we took 64,000 rhythm strips from Zeo patches, 30 seconds each. And what was so fascinating is it actually did as good as a consensus committee of 9 cardiologists, 8 of 9 who are credible practicing EPs, some of whom have even spoken here. And then the other group, but it actually outperformed the average cardiologist, but the ground truth was the committee. And what's so great is when you map the confusion matrix, the misclassification between doctor and consensus committee, and AI and consensus committee, you get the same thing. And it's actually more important to see this than it is to say doctors are better or AI is better. The reason this is important is that the AI makes the same mistakes that humans make. Okay, so if you look at the misclassification in this matrix with the network on the left, it will miscall, AFib as atrial tach. It will miscall Wanky block as other forms of AV block, SVT and AF. So if it's making the same mistakes and not calling AFib VFib by accident, this is safe to deploy as long as the error rates are low. I would argue this is a good way to assess the quality of electrocardiography reads of humans. But nonetheless, it's this kind of work that has really enabled wearables to move on. Now, there are other medical use cases that are being explored. This is work that's been done with an AliveCore device and a 6-lead ECG, and Dave Albert is here in the front. But again, there may be many, many use cases here that you can go after that are more clinical with point-of-care devices that you can use in many other ways that are important to us as clinicians. The other thing that I mentioned at the end is sort of a blended approach where you can take heart rate and tie it to the ECG, either with AI-guided prompting where you might have an arrhythmia, or simply on the basis of heart rate alone. And so if you have a heart rate that's high, you can then have the device say, hey, you might want to take an ECG. And so this is the blended approach that actually could have reasonable clinical utility in certain situations of AFib. If people have slow AFib, if they have a pacer, their rates are slow, this may be harder to do, and we're going to have to get more training and more validation in those areas. But again, it's these blended sensor approaches that are consumer-facing that I think can change things. And again, I think this is an idea. Can you optimize rate control with a patient directly with self-management, or can you think of ad hoc rhythm-guided anticoagulation or other strategies? The other thing is CHADS2VASC is fine, but it really wasn't designed for this kind of sensor data. It was designed for people who have an ICD-9 code of AFib in their medical record and discharge from the hospital. That's how it was validated. But can you take all this data and dense data and really refine your risk prediction, and let us not think about indefinite anticoagulation, but think about 1 year risk of stroke, heart failure, hospitalization, or death, and anchor this at certain use cases. New diagnosis of AFib, hospitalization for AFib, post-ablation. Kind of the 3 important cases where we want to know what goes on. And you can take raw echo data, you can take the daily AF burden in a device or in wearables, et cetera, et cetera. And so right now, I think if you look at this at a high level about care delivery, where are we? Well, I think we're here on the left. Somebody gets a watch, they get a notification, they call you, you see them in clinic, or you say it's okay. The next thing you'll do is probably give them some medical grade ambulatory monitor to validate the finding is true, and then off you go, and you're in this sort of loop of ad hoc face-to-face care. Where I think things are going, and I've been pretty vocal on trying to engage the professional societies with these groups, is telehealth. So would you rather wait 2 to 4 weeks to see your doctor, or would you be willing to pay $25 or $50 right there to be connected to a doctor who can easily be trained to do all the things we do for AFib? It's not that hard if you train somebody who can then deliver the wearable right away. So I would argue that the consumer preferences are going to shift here because of a willingness to pay for convenience. We see it with Netflix, we see it with Amazon, we see it with delivery of food. People don't want, the endowed professor EP necessarily. They want good care that's done very quick. And so I think we're going to be moving to that model. The final model is going to be on the right, where we may be completely disintermediated, and this may happen kind of in ways completely around us. And again, there's huge regulatory overlay, a big landscape that we don't know, but this is where we're going. And there are many telehealth companies kind of in this area where I think it's going to go quite well. Finally, what you can do with the atrium, you can do in the ventricle, and so there are now use cases and companies around looking at cardiac arrest, syncope, and engaging emergency medical response as well. So in closing, I think wearables have moved beyond what we used to call wellness into rhythm assessment as a pre-diagnostic or diagnostic. The integration into clinical care is an unknown. We don't know for the reasons that Sunita and I outlined. ECG is the gold standard. But I do think that there's many challenges, but also opportunities for us with these new cases as we sort of think about how we want to integrate these into consumer technology. Thank you.